Morning, everyone. Sorry, I'm going to have to keep taking drinks. It's not, although it's called morning brew, this is not a brew. This is hot lemon because I've got a sore throat now. So that's fun when your job is talking. But it always has been because I used to be a teacher. But there you go. So I've sent off for the lockets. But good morning, everyone. So we're going to talk, I think, just about the politics of the way Rishi Sunak's been handling things. It could include a few things, but obviously mostly the school's building scandal. Because I keep trying to make the point that if you think about it from the public's point of view, I mean, you are the public, but you think about it from the public's point of view. So there's an emergency, right? There is an emergency. It is normal for politicians in government to try and dodge the blame. That is perfectly normal. All governments will seek to do that. But ultimately, what the public are interested in, particularly when it's a real crisis, is less about whose fault it is. Granted, whoever's fault it is, they're going to judge less kindly. But it's mostly about what you're going to do about it. What are you going to do about it? What is Rishi Sunak going to do about it? All we've had, if you think about what's been presented, because today I looked at the front pages of the newspapers, certainly the ones that are on the BBC, which seem to be a good selection of them. There's no mention of it on the front pages now. So what of the public, if you're in an area, the government have now published, I haven't checked it through, but they've now published a list of affected schools, which is how they won the vote yesterday. Labour presented a motion to force the government to release details. It was going to be of the schools, and then, but also the decision making, because they want to tie Rishi Sunak into this. He was the chancellor when the funding was cut quite severely. Hard. In fact, the funding already was very poor. It wasn't good enough. That's why we have these schools falling down now. And that was the case before he became chancellor. But when he was chancellor, he halved the funding still further. He is trying to say, actually, no, I increased the funding for like maintenance, stuff like that. So yeah, we're talking about replacing buildings at the end of their lifetime, though, and you halved that, according to a senior civil servant. So, you know, Labour said, well, let's have a look at these papers then. And the Tories voted against that because, again, it's what the public are most interested in is my school affected. And then if their school is affected, then what they want to know is what are you going to do about it? All they've got from Rishi Sunak so far is we'll give you a caseworker. Are we getting a new building? No. No new buildings. I couldn't believe it. I thought Rishi Sunak would absolutely have to do the following. He would have to commit to rebuilding these schools because they're falling down. How can you not? And he would have to present a schedule of the work that's going to take place. You can't do it. You can't get it all done before the election. Not possible. You know, even if the money were available, there aren't the architects, there aren't the builders, there aren't the building materials to get it all. You can't start them all at the same time. You can't do it all at the same time. Sorry, there's still work going on downstairs. Which is why I found it odd that he's focusing on the cost. Oh, we can't afford it. So why are you focusing on the cost when that's not the limiting factor? If you could afford it, you still couldn't do it because there are not enough builders, architects and building materials to actually get it done before the election. So you're leaving it mostly to Labour anyway. But if Sunak at least increased the funding for school rebuildings programme and started a few new ones and then produced a schedule of when it's going to be done, it would be much more easily dealt with. He would still take a reputational hit. I liken it to Partygate with Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson, if at the start of Partygate, Boris Johnson had just come clean and said, look, he could have downplayed it still, but if it had come clean and said, look, yeah, this happened, shouldn't have happened. I now realise that. We didn't realise at the time. We didn't think we were doing anything wrong at the time, but absolutely we were. I'm sorry. That would have been it. You know, he would have taken a reputational hit still, but that would have ended. It would no longer be newsworthy because he's owned up to it. Because the news story ran because he was lying. So he would tell a lie, then he'd get caught out in the lie, then he'd tell another lie, get caught out, tell another lie. It ended up with an internal investigation, then a police investigation, then a privileges committee investigation. all of that, none of it would have happened. None of it would have happened if it had just come out and said, yeah, okay, and this is what I'm going to do about it. Rishi Sunak could do the same. Lee Cruz, £2 super chat, thank you very much. Sunak reduced to Johnson, jibes and outright lies. It's worse than that. I mean, to say that Rishi Sunak has tried to sort of say, I'm different to Boris Johnson. It's like he's trying to say to the public, I'm different to Boris Johnson, but to say to his party, I'm basically the same. It's like, but you're doing them in public. So you have to make your mind up, which is it? But he's following Johnson's MO on the Partygate situation. So this could turn into Partygate for him because he's doing the same thing. Like, what was this thing yesterday about him saying, oh no, this is brand new. We acted quickly when we found out about this thing. So, well, what thing? What thing? That schools are collapsing? No, you've known about that for a long time. There was a report in The Guardian in January talking about how Labour wanted the government to provide more details about the schools at risk. That's back in January, right? Oh no, the RAAC thing, you see, the aerated concrete. That's the problem. That's the problem. It's like, okay, all right then. Let me just show you something. I've still got it up somewhere, I think. Hang on. No. Right. Let me just throw something up here. So this is Hansard. Hansard is the record of parliamentary debates. If I go to the bottom of this particular debate, Gillian Keegan, who's the Education Secretary, talking about RAAC in schools specifically, because there's issues in hospitals as well, and they've known about that for a while, right? This is specifically about schools. She's asked a question. There's a Liberal Democrat MP here, Marina Wilson, who's expressing concern at schools. Well, actually, this one's saying NHS England as well, but she's mentioning schools that there's some of them. She says there's a potential their life expired and they're liable to collapse. So the Lib Dem MP, this is in January, and there were Labour MPs as well, but this one's a Lib Dem MP, saying that these schools were life expired, in other words, come to the end of their 30-year life and liable to collapse. Gillian Keegan recognises the issue. When is this? This is 16th of January, 2023. You can't see that. Why can't you see that? Let me just do that again. Messed that up. I don't know why that didn't go. There it is. This debate was on the 16th of January this year. Don't forget RAC is in court. It's like loss of public buildings. I mean, at the end of the day, as I understand it, I'm not an engineer, but as I understand it, the benefit of it was for many years, it's lightweight, right? It's lightweight. It's very suitable for making buildings. It's good for insulation. There were multiple benefits. It's no longer used. It hasn't been used since the 90s. But that's not because it was all of a sudden a problem. It was just that a lot of the time it was used when we had to build things very quickly post-war. And also there were better building techniques, I guess. So it hasn't been used for a while. So these buildings now that are collapsing are pretty much the last ones that were built using this technique. But it will be in lots of public buildings because at the time it was, and it's fine. If you've got a building and you go, well, it's got a lifetime of 30 years, that's fine. Just build it again 30 years later. Maybe 28 years later, who knows? I don't know how good that one is, but there you go. But absolutely. But the government cannot claim. I don't actually understand, and no journalist really pinning Sunak or Keegan down on it. What's new? You're saying you acted quickly on new information. What new information? Because yesterday in Parliament, Sunak said that these mitigations only take days or weeks to put in. The mitigations, by the way, are putting kids in the hall or a porter cabin, right? That's what he means by mitigations. Not getting their classrooms fit for purpose again. Sometimes it means throwing kids into a different school. so that class sizes are increasing again. That's what they mean by mitigations. Now, okay, you can't throw a building up overnight, but there's no plan to actually rebuild these schools at all, not even a long-term plan. Because the current situation is, the reason we're in this mess is because instead of building somewhere between 300 and 400 schools a year, the Tories were building, after Rishi Sunak had dealt with it, 50. 50, actually, I think it's been 50 a year for quite a while. Aaron's saying Roman concrete lasts quite a while. I mean, the Colosseum's not looking brilliant, but okay. No, but I mean, it's this particular technique, though. This particular, like, the Romans weren't that bothered about it being lightweight either, were they? But there we go. But you know, it's an absolute nonsense to me, because if you're someone who's affected, so you now know if your school's affected without it being closed, I assume, because I gather they released that information yesterday. So if you know your school's affected, what you want to know is, right, my kid is currently having lessons in the main hall, right? When is this going to be sorted? Now, the reality is that as far as the government's concerned, it will never be sorted. Like, let us imagine the Conservatives are in power for like the next 10 years. Let's say Labour hadn't sorted themselves out. Let's say this scandal had hit with Labour still in a mess and not poised to win the next election at all. What would the government be saying? Nothing. You know, they're not. If when they're about to lose an election, they're not saying that they're going to rebuild these schools, why would they if they were still on course to win it? They wouldn't. So their plan is it's to carry on building like 50 new builds a year. That's their plan. 50 a year. Which is not enough. Nowhere near enough. It's not even, I mean, they should have come out and just straight away said, right, okay, this is an issue. Sunak tried to say he wasn't aware of just how serious the issue is. Okay, go with that. That's fine. But he now is aware, so he should have said, now that I am fully appraised of the situation, this is what I have ordered to be done. But he hasn't. He hasn't at all. All Shorts was saying there's a plaster that you can mix with piss to stop it hardening too fast. Maybe they mix aero concrete with piss too. I think, yeah, I imagine it's the pH that's particularly suitable there. I can't imagine it's any of the chemicals actually in urine. Led by Donkeys did a great film on the school Sunak and his wife went to in the poor UK state system. The difference is breathtaking. It is. It is. You know, and again, this is why a lot of people like Graham, for example, will say, you know, we should just abolish all private schools, because then all of the parents who spend a lot of money getting their kids into what they think is a good school wouldn't be able to. They wouldn't have the option. So what would they do instead? They will hammer the government to make sure that their local school, which is only costing them their taxes, is up to snuff. Because people want their kids to have a good education. And people who can afford to pay for it, a lot of them will do that. Some people out of principle won't. And in reality, there is no need. Like, you know, I will, you know, say, by and large, what private schools do is they do two things. The way they're worth their money is they do two things. First of all, they get you connections. You know, they connect you with people who are going to basically run the country. And I don't just mean in government, I mean own the country, like your business. So they're useful for that. You'll not get much of that in a state school. And the second reason is because of smaller class sizes and focus and all the rest of it, they're much better at getting lazy, not very bright kids a reasonable education, a reasonable qualifications. Whereas in a state school, if you're bright enough and you do the work, you're going to get the good grades. There's no barrier to the grades in a state school, even a really crap one, you know, but you're not going to build up those contacts. And you're not going to, you know, unless you are bright and hardworking, then yes, you will suffer. Craig's come up with a comment there. I think it's reference to something else that I'll have missed, but it says Thatcher and co apparently allowed them to use it longer than the advisors recommended. Apparently supposed to be taken out in the 80s, cheap, and Tories are cheap. This is the thing, isn't it? They don't spend anything unless they have to. Like, I'm going to mention, like, so think about the pandemic, right? So we had, as a result of Operation Cygnus, there were not very many. I mean, consider this: ever since the Tories have been in power, the UK government, that's Cameron's government, May's government, Johnson's government, had all considered the number one threat to the nation to be a global pandemic. They understood it. There were cabinet meetings about it. Number one threat to the nation, global pandemic. So they ran an exercise, Operation Cygnus, to find out what our preparations were like, what we need to do to improve them. So that came back with recommendations. They didn't implement very many of them. One of them they did was a pandemic response unit, essentially, which wasn't really funded very well, but we technically had one. Then Boris Johnson scrapped it in 2019. No sooner did he become Prime Minister, he was scrapping it. A few months later, we were hit by the global pandemic that the government had accepted was the number one threat to the nation. Different type of pandemic, but nonetheless a pandemic. So now it looks like a bit short-sighted, doesn't it, cancelling this pandemic response unit. So then you think to yourself, okay, so now that we've realised that actually that wasn't the best move, have we reinstated it? No, we still don't have a pandemic response unit. Why? Because the Tories are thinking, well, it's happened now. It's locking the stable door after the horse has bolted, as if there couldn't be another pandemic just round the corner. There easily could. You know, the conditions still exist. Just because we're still in the middle of one doesn't mean another type of one can't come along. David Falconer there, 38 Hong Kong dollars. Thank you very much. Says, didn't Birmingham City Council vote to leave, i.e. give up on receiving EU funding? I really don't know. I have been looking at the council's issue because for those who don't know, I'm sure most of you do, Birmingham City Council, which is a Labour council, has basically had to declare itself insolvent. The Tories, of course, as you would, are making a lot of this. Oh, this is what happens when you let Labour run things. The problem is, first of all, it's not actually going to work because people know that Birmingham City Council are not going to be running the government. Second of all, that's a Labour council. There's like 24 Conservative councils going to the wall, going bust. So it's like they've found one Labour council and 24 Conservative councils that are going bust. And also, and I knew this would be the case when I looked it up, it's because councils are not getting as much funding as they did under Labour. It's really that simple. Councils weren't going to the wall. Now, it is possible, of course, for a council to be badly run and end up in dire straits. Like the Marble Arch Mound, for example, one Conservative London council is a classic example. Spend millions of pounds on a pile of dirt and then about £2/3 getting it cleared away again because it was a stupid idea. You know, that is mismanagement. And you can get mismanagement in all parties because the thing with councillors, you know, and councils in general is they don't have access to the same quality of civil service support and they have less public scrutiny over them. So you often get, and they're not paid properly. They're not really paid. So you don't really you get clowns in charge of councils in all parties. But the bottom line is that the funding for councils in England since 2010 has massively dropped by 15% in real terms. Sarah saying, don't they fund the council? I'm not sure who you mean by they, but the government decide what council funding is. Yes, there's two main sources. Well, there's several sources of revenue, I suppose, because there's some business rates, but mostly it's council tax, where the government set the ceiling. You can have it lower, but they sort of set the ceiling. Although ironically, the Conservatives in the local elections were trying to say that Conservative councils have lower council tax, not actually true. It's Labour councils. And in fact, I think Conservative councils are I think they're more expensive than everyone. But that doesn't matter. Council tax is one, and central government sort of decides by how much you're allowed to raise it each year. So they set an effective cap on council tax. And the other source is money from central government, which of course Westminster government also says. So yeah, councils have very little scope themselves for tax raising. There are business rates. If they're able to attract more businesses to set up there, then yes, they can get more in business rates, but it's not very much. Chris was saying that Birmingham has the 2012 equality liabilities to deal with, and it's millions a month. Yeah, I mean, that may have been... that's not necessarily something we need to have sympathy for. Maybe the current councillors, but, I don't know the details of that because I'm going to focus on, why it's declared insolvency. But for something like that, that sounds like that is a council cock-up, for which you can reasonably criticise the council. But the fact of the matter is, it's not like it's just this Labour council that's declaring bankruptcy. You've got 24 Conservative ones. And the funding for councils is way lower than it was when Labour in power. Brum's business rate income's been falling a lot. I imagine a lot have, to be fair, lost a number of big businesses. I think it'll be the same in a lot of places. Like, if you look at the way... I'm going to do it in a video later on my channel at some point, today or tomorrow. If you look at the way the funding has fallen, it was almost like there was a little bit of an increase during COVID. That was down to the COVID grants. But remember, the COVID grants weren't extra money. It was money to cope because councils suddenly had even more expenses to deal with COVID. So the... And I'll bet you the COVID grants didn't actually cover those extra expenses either. So it's probably still a real terms fall compared with necessary expenses. Mike saying, Labour should introduce a blind recruitment process for all jobs. No name, school or uni info, no picture. The only criterion is education experience. The problem there is I don't think you can do that. You could maybe do it for the written applications, but then they'll just sort you out when it comes to the interview process. There are a lot, to be honest, there are a lot of, like in large departments, they're not likely to pay much attention to that anyway. In fact, it's considered, I think, good practice these days with your CV not to include certain amounts of personal information on it, so that you present what they really need to know. There's no hard and fast rules unless you get a form that demands these things. Quite funny though, isn't it, when you talk about education and how private schools set you up so even if you're not that bright or you're not that academic, you can still make it. Gillian Keegan, of course, the one who was, before this blew up, the one who was saying, oh, no one worries about your qualifications after a few years. It's like, maybe that's just if you went to private school. Maybe that's just if you went to private school. UK to rejoin the Horizon scheme, has that been mentioned yet? No, but it took far too long. I'll tell you what the breaking news is today, if you want to move slightly aside, is Chris Pincher has now resigned. So that is now definitely another by-election this autumn. So there's going to be 3 by-elections at least. They're not all going to be on the same day because the SNP moved Rutherglen and Hamilton West for cheekily just before the Labour conference. So that's an interesting one. And that is interesting. I'm going to discuss that as well at some point. That's an interesting one. So let me try and work out what date that would be. Mid Bedfordshire has also been moved, but that's for after the conference season. So let me work it out. It'll be Thursday. It's the 5th of October. So that's between Labour and the SNP, right? 5th of October. The Tories, I think, have moved Mid Bedfordshire for the 19th of October. So that's after all the conferences. I assume they'll put Tamworth on the same day because they can now move the Tamworth by-election can now be moved today, should they want to. So they might just have that on the same day as Mid Bedfordshire. Labour are very likely to win Tamworth. Very likely. I mean, again, in terms of the majority they got in 2019, you'd think, oh, this should be tight. And it could be. Anything can happen in a by-election. But I think Labour are probably nailed on for that. Pincher, you couldn't pick a better name. Well, no, indeed. Ed Catflap, thank you very much. £1 super chat. What was Pincher's reasons for leaving? I doubt it's because he was a sex pest. I don't know. I've only just seen it's literally breaking news as it went live, so I don't know what statement he's made as yet. Presumably still protesting his innocence. It says, according to the BBC, Pincher said, "I do not want my constituents to be put to further uncertainty," because obviously he was suspended for like 8 weeks, so there was going to be a recall petition. So he's basically said, "I don't want my constituents to be put to further uncertainty, so in consequence, I have made arrangements to resign and leave the Commons," which is, of course, what you would say. That's just standard. But basically what he means is he doesn't think he would have won the recall petition, but it is what it is. Yeah, he absolutely lost his appeal. Yeah, he did appeal his suspension, completely lost it, because of course he lost it. It was ridiculous. But that was at the start of the week. The reason he's resigned now is he's thought about it and thought, yeah, I'm not going to win the recall petition, so I may as well go early rather than later. How have we sunk so low? Well, I mean, there's several parts to it. There's lots of different things. I mean, the media I always blame above everything else because they act deliberately out of malice. You could argue the Conservative Party, but the Conservative Party are more like trains. They have to follow the political tracks laid for them. If the media presented the news properly, the Conservatives wouldn't even try and get away with half the stuff they get away with. They wouldn't even attempt it. They know they'd have no chance. So the media ultimately are mostly to blame. But there's lots of things. The Conservatives have to take responsibility because they are maliciously acting to harm the country. The Labour have to take responsibility because they are not serious enough about winning. And I accept, I said in 2010, I had the same attitude. I learned a powerful lesson in 2015. When it came to, I don't think I was actually in the Labour Party at the time, so I don't think I voted on this, but because I was in and then out and then in again. But my views were, at the time after Gordon Brown stepped down, that I thought David Miliband will be the better campaigner, but Ed Miliband would be the better Prime Minister. That's what I thought at the time. And I still haven't changed my mind. But that was me thinking that I could afford to prioritise effectively ideology over campaign competence, which, and after 2015, I've never thought that since, and I never will. I mean, if Labour presents a strong challenge and just, you can only put the loss down to a campaign of lies in the media and from the Tories, then you can say, well, at least they tried. But let's be honest, Labour haven't tried for a very long time, until very recently. Here's hope the people of Tamworth return to voting Labour now. I mean, they will this time. Who knows for the future? But for this time, I mean, by-elections are tricky. You can look at, in the general election, you can look at the MRP polling. That's for general elections. It's not for the by-election. By-election can also be all sorts of things. But the Conservatives will be focusing on mid-Bedfordshire because it's almost like losing Tamworth is priced in now for Sunak. He's expected to lose Tamworth, so he can afford it. It's like people's opinions of him won't suffer. His reputation won't suffer if he loses Tamworth because people are expecting him to. So if he actually wins it, he enhances it a little bit. But mid-Bedfordshire, no, that's not priced in. The Tories are expected to win that. They should win that. Even with everything, they should still win it. Plumdale saying, remember when the media shone a light on wrongdoing back in the day? I think that would be when Labour in power. They do it when Labour in power. They've got no problems there. It's only when the Conservatives are in power they don't. Admittedly, I think things have probably gotten worse now. But again, that's because the public have been gaslit to accept lower and lower standards. Sarah saying, always gets my back up when James O'Brien acts like he isn't the media. Agree with him often, but he's not excluded from this accountability. And Viv saying, I think James O'Brien would agree with you. He admits very much to being part of the problem in the past. He's doing his best to call it out now. I mean, well, this is it as well. You have got some people in the media, mainstream media, who know what they're doing. They know it's wrong. They're doing it anyway. Andrew Marr's a classic example because we can see what he's like now. He's now free from the constraints of being at the BBC, and he can now be more honest. It doesn't mean to say we have to agree with him. He's still presenting opinions, right? But it's very different opinions to the ones he was expressing on the BBC, isn't it? And that just shows you. You know, Dan Hodges of the Mail on Sunday, another classic, absolute classic. You know, he is paid to back the Conservatives. Every now and then he'll tweet or write something that looks like he's shining a spotlight on where the Tories are going wrong and criticising them. But he's only doing that to draw you in. Because people, if there's something the Tories are clearly getting wrong, there's no point in denying it in the media. You won't get anyone to read your article. You need people to read your article. So you openly admit what the issue is, and then you pretend it's caused by something else. John's saying, is this a new channel? It depends what your definition of new is. Chris was saying, 2005, Labour in Reading nominated an ex-councillor who'd been accused of sexual assault a decade earlier. This isn't limited to the Tories. I mean, I don't know about that particular case, and I am going to say, yes, things like this are not limited to the Tories. It's much more widespread in the Tories because their instinct is always to downplay the seriousness of it. As far as they're concerned, whether an issue is serious or not tends to depend on who the victim is. If it's someone they believe, view as a second or third class citizen, not so serious. But I will also say this, like, if someone's accused of something, that's not the same thing as being found guilty of something. Pincher has not simply been accused, he has been found guilty of something, right? This is not, he hasn't been suspended based on hearsay. 91 Lee saying, Labour sort the wealth tax or I'm not voting for you ever again. Why? I mean, I'm a fan of wealth tax. I'm not a fan of their latest stance, I have to say. But what you're basically saying is you want a Conservative government. And I know it's a horrible thing to go, no, it's not. You do. It's one or the other. It's really one or the other. The other thing I will say is this about taxation is, why do you want a wealth tax? If you want a wealth tax because Labour need to raise taxes from people who can afford it to fund better public services, yes, and Labour will do that. Just because they're not going to do, like, focus, I would advise, focus less on the methods and more on the outcomes. What is the outcome we want? Properly funded public services. If Labour can do that without throwing people into poverty, if Labour can do that and people can maintain and improve their standard of living, why are you arguing about methods? But ultimately, it does still come down to this. Even if you think they're, if you're going to vote on a single policy area, think to yourself. So if you think, okay, wealth tax is what it is for me, are you suggesting that the Conservatives will introduce a wealth tax? Because I have to say they will not. In fact, they do the opposite. They give the wealthy money. Labour are not going to be giving the wealthy money. There will be some tax breaks, and some of those tax breaks will go to wealthy corporations. Those will only be ones where the Treasury gets a return or where it's politically essential. But in most cases, it's not actually, tax breaks are not actually politically necessary. So they're purely about either you want to give them or there's going to be a return for the Treasury. It's an investment. The outcome we want is discipline capital, hence wealth tax. Yeah, but are you going to get that with the Tories? Like, who's going to be closer to where you want to be? Because no party is going to be where you are, because you're one of 32 million voters. So, and you're all different. There are a lot of sheeple in the country, but even the sheeple are a little bit different, right? So you have to ask yourself, so this is what I want. This is where I want the country to be. How do I use my vote to move as close to it as possible? Because there is no way to use your vote to move on to it. The only people who can use their vote to move on to it are those who are where most key voters are, which is basically the centre. So unless you are a centrist, there is absolutely zero way to use your vote to move to exactly where you want. Even the far right, like you look at the country now and go, oh, it's led by a far right government. But it's not where the far right want it to be. The likes of Jacob Rees-Mogg are still whining. Liz Truss is still whining. Rishi Sunak is not far right, but you know, he doesn't like where we are. No one likes where this country is at the moment. We should be encouraging the wealthy to invest in British companies and infrastructure rather than going offshore. Labour actually have policies of that. So when it comes to public contracts, so first of all, Labour have promised the largest... Oh, we've run out of time, sorry. I'll finish this point. Labour have promised the largest insourcing programme, you know, for a very long time. So first of all, you save money that way because you're not giving it to dodgy Tories. But the other thing is they've said when it comes to because there'll still be public contracts to private companies, they've said that they will be prioritising things like their relationship with workers and so on. So as well as their environmental credentials. So I always say, for me, like a private business needs to justify itself to society. The way it works, if you leave it to its own devices, it justifies itself to its shareholders or owners, right? But we as a society need to say, no, we need you to justify your existence to us as well. That is where government regulation comes in. And this is a great way to do it. The government, a Labour government, will be saying, right, we do have public tenders. We need, you know, we do need some private companies to deliver these services now, in the short term at least. But we are going to choose ones who who run their business ethically, you know, who treat their workers well, who pay their workers well, who have some regard for like the environment and their local community. So that will be doing it slightly different. But anyway, John's just saying, will I still be doing a different buys? Yes, that is still my channel. I make no money from this. Graham's not making any money from this at the moment. But I am late, I'm afraid, and I am going to have to carry on having a hot drink and go and record my first video for today, which is written but not recorded yet. But thanks very much, everyone. Don't forget to click the like button and subscribe to the channel, of course. And until next time, I will see you later.